The evening mist settled over the village like the breath of the forest. Thin, gray, and damp, wooden rooftops stood silently in the valley, nestled at the foot of the rolling mountains, where the line between man and wilderness was nothing more than a blurred boundary. A cold wind slipped through every crack and crevice, carrying the scent of pine resin, damp earth, and something else, something unfamiliar. No one knew what it was, until they saw it, a gray wolf, limping. It walked quietly across the village's main dirt path like a living ghost. Its thick, dark fur was matted with mud and dried blood. One of its hind legs dragged behind, leaving long streaks in the wet ground. It did not howl, it did not snarl, nor did it run away. It simply moved forward, slowly, as if drawn by some invisible purpose. The villagers froze. The blacksmith stood still, his hammer slipping from his hand. The old woman selling chestnuts yanked her shawl over her face. A child screamed and clung tightly to his mother's skirt. Doors slammed shut in haste. Eyes peered out from behind curtains, filled with worry. To them, a wolf was a symbol of danger, a harbinger of disaster in the shape of a beast. No one dared to approach. No one dared to speak. But the wolf did not attack. It did not growl. It paid no mind to the fear surrounding it. Its yellow eyes, deep and sorrowful, gazed toward the edge of the village, where the forest stretched endlessly into the distance. In the fading twilight, those eyes shimmered like a buried gemstone under layers of mud. Wild, yet yearning, a boy, around 10 years old, stood upright and let go of his mother's hand. He was not afraid. His innocent eyes met the wolf's gaze, as if some invisible thread connected them. Why was it walking like that? Why did it not flee? Why did those eyes look so sad? As if calling out to someone, as if leading the way towards something greater than itself. The wolf continued on, its injured leg dragging with each step, when it finally disappeared into the forest's edge, leaving behind only the sound of wind and cold, wet footprints. The boy remained, staring after it. For the first time, a new feeling stirred within him, compassion for a creature the village had always called a monster. And from that moment on, the fate of the wolf, and of the people in that quiet little village, began to change in a way that could never be undone. Daniel had arrived in the village less than a week ago. He was a young veterinarian, with eyes that always sparkled with curiosity and hands that constantly carried the scent of antiseptic. No one in the village had truly warmed up to him. They saw him as a city man, different and unpredictable. But Daniel did not mind. He loved nature, loved the way life fought to survive no matter how wounded it was. On the night the wolf appeared, Daniel was cleaning up his small clinic beside the house. Hearing the commotion, he stepped outside, saw faint traces of blood on the ground, and heard the villagers whispering, "Another wolf. This one's hurt. It's dangerous." But to Daniel, it was not a threat. It was a calling, a sign. The next morning, he rose early and followed the footprints still lingering on the dirt path. When he reached the edge of the forest, he was not surprised to see those yellow eyes watching him from afar. Hidden behind thick foliage, the wolf did not flee. It stood still, silent, as if waiting. Daniel raised his hands slowly. Without a word, the wolf flinched slightly, then suddenly turned its head. But instead of running away, it stepped deeper into the forest, occasionally looking back with an urgent gaze. Daniel could feel it clearly. It wanted him to follow. It was not a trap. It was not a trick. It was a call. A voice rang out behind him, slicing through the air like a knife. "Do not follow it. You will not come back." An old man, hunched and wrinkled, stood leaning on a cane by the fence. "It is not leading you anywhere good. Wolves never do." But Daniel did not stop. There was something in the animal's eyes that made it impossible for him to turn away. It was not just professional instinct. It was not simply compassion. It was a deeper sense, intuition, and his intuition told him that if he did not go today, something terrible would happen, not just to that wolf, but to other lives he had yet to know. He took a deep breath and stepped past the boundary between the village and the forest. The place where people usually stopped, the place where fear began. But for Daniel, it was where every true journey began. And up ahead, in the quiet forest under the faint light of dawn, the wolf continued to lead the way. The forest slowly swallowed the morning light, leaving only scattered beams filtering through the thick canopy. Daniel stepped carefully over the dense carpet of decaying leaves beneath his feet. His ears tuned to the slightest sound, the wolf led the way, never looking back, but whenever the distance between them grew too wide, it would stop and glance over its shoulder, as if to remind him to keep up. The path grew more difficult. Thorny bushes snagged at his legs, and dry branches snapped under every step. Still, Daniel did not stop. Inside him, a powerful instinct stirred. He was about to witness something far beyond the reach of science. Blood began to appear again, faint, dried, but steady. At times, the marks looked as if something, or someone, had been dragged through this path. Daniel knelt, touching the soil, sensing something off. These were not the marks of a predator. They felt more like a plea for help, a cry, weak, broken, like the moan of a creature in pain. Daniel looked up at once. The wolf had also stopped, ears standing alert. Then it took off, no longer waiting. Daniel ran after it, heart pounding. They reached a narrow ravine, where the earth dropped into a small gully covered in green moss. There, beneath a rock sheltering under a web of branches, lay a female wolf, her body soaked in blood, breathing heavily, eyes wide open and fixed on Daniel. Huddled against her belly were 3 wolf pups, trembling. Daniel froze. In that instant, everything became clear. The limping male was the alpha, the pack leader, the mate of the injured wolf. It had walked into the village, braving danger, to seek out a human, the one person it believed might help. Daniel moved slowly. The alpha did not growl. It stood between him and its family, eyes narrowed in wary focus, but not aggressive. Time seemed to freeze in that moment. Man and wolf, in the heart of the forest, communicated without words, through a shared understanding that went beyond species. Daniel knelt down and carefully pulled out a medical kit from his backpack. His eyes never left the alpha. And then, the smallest shift, Alpha stepped back, just slightly, allowing a path forward. That alone was enough. For Daniel, it was consent, a miracle. He approached the injured female and examined her. The wound was deep, likely from a metal trap or a previous attack. Daniel did not have the tools to treat her properly here. He needed more time, and he needed help, but the forest was too deep, and dark clouds were gathering overhead. Daniel knew he could not leave. He could not abandon them. The decision came from his heart, and as if to affirm it, the first gust of a storming wind howled through the ravine, signaling that tonight, they would stay here, together. Rain began to fall just as darkness swallowed the ancient forest. This was no gentle rain, but a true storm, fierce and cold. The droplets lashed against skin like whips. Wind howled through the trees, snapping branches with cracks that echoed like the roars of the wilderness. Daniel knelt beside the mother wolf, his hands numb with cold but never stopping. He cleaned the wound with what little alcohol he had left, then stitched the torn flesh layer by layer with surgical thread. The mother wolf let out a cry. Alpha immediately stepped forward, but stopped when it saw Daniel's eyes. They did not plead, they did not fear, they held only a silent promise. "I'm trying to save your family." The storm spared no one. Daniel knew he could not let the pups tremble in the rain. He took off his coat, then the sweater beneath it, spreading them as a soft bedding. One by one, he wrapped the pups inside, warming them with his own breath. They curled into themselves, hearts racing, but did not flee. Somehow, they knew, their survival now rested with this man. The night stretched endlessly. Daniel did not sleep. He shielded them with a small emergency tarp, sitting between the mother and her pups. Alpha lay nearby, never closing its eyes, like a silent guardian, its golden eyes no longer filled with tension, but something close to gratitude. At dawn, the mother wolf stirred and opened her eyes, locking them on Daniel. The wound had stopped bleeding, and though her breath was weak, it was steady. She did not howl or move. She simply stared into his eyes. A moment of silence, where two beings of different worlds saw one another not as enemies, but as allies. Alpha approached Daniel. The wariness was gone. It gently rested its head on his leg, as if to say, "Thank you." Daniel reached out and touched its head, its fur soaking wet, yet warm. It was the first time he had ever touched a wild wolf, and it did not pull away. When the sun rose, the storm retreated as if it had never come. The first rays of light filtered through the leaves, shining down on Daniel's exhausted body and the wolves around him. The scent of damp earth, of blood, and of life mixed in the morning air. He knew they had made it through a night of life and death, and were no longer strangers. Daniel looked down into the ravine, watching the wolf family breathing steadily again. A faint smile passed across his lips. There was no applause, no one to witness, but in his heart, it was the most beautiful moment life had ever given him. Deep in the forest, one man and one pack of wolves had crossed the line between instinct and trust. And there, love had spoken its very first, wordless phrase. Since the night of the storm, Daniel had become part of a story no one ever believed could be real. Every week, he returned to the ravine, not out of duty, but because of a quiet promise made with the wolves. They still lived in the forest, wild and independent, but now, they no longer hid. Sometimes, in the early morning, Alpha would appear at the edge of the village, standing still like a shadow, gazing toward Daniel's house. Daniel never told the villagers the full details of what had happened that stormy night. He simply said he had helped an injured animal, and that it had survived. But the truth was far greater than that. It was a bond, not of words, not of leashes, but of understanding between two worlds once thought forever apart. Over time, the villagers began to notice strange things. One morning, old Jacob's sheep were all safe, even though stray dogs had been seen the night before. People said they saw a large wolf standing between the flock and the dogs. It did not attack, only stood there, growling softly, just enough to scare them off. Without bloodshed, when they got close, the wolf disappeared into the forest, like an unseen sentinel. When Daniel heard the story, he only smiled. He knew it was Alpha, knew that the same wolf who had once risked everything to find him was now protecting sheep. Not for a reward, but for something greater, trust. The village began to change. Slowly, stories of the strange wolf spread like a new legend. Children no longer screamed at the sight of a gray shadow among the trees. Some villagers began to leave scraps of meat at the forest's edge, not to lure, but as a gesture of thanks. Some still doubted. That was natural, but fear gave way to curiosity, and curiosity to respect. Daniel was no longer the outsider from the city. He was the one who had crossed the boundary and returned, not alone. He did not speak much about it, never boasted, but when he looked toward the forest, there was something in his eyes that words could never express. It was gratitude, reverence, something only those who had once been seen by a wolf, truly seen, could ever understand. On certain late afternoons, when mist began to rise over the forest's edge, people would sometimes spot the familiar silhouette of Alpha, standing still, not approaching, not retreating. And in the small house, Daniel would be by the window, gently nodding. No words were exchanged, but they knew. They had never truly been apart. A bond had formed, not through language, but through action, not for ownership, but for companionship. When humans and nature learn to trust one another, they can coexist, without the need to conquer. Many years later, Daniel wrote that story down, not to publish it, not for fame, but as a way to capture the things he had never been able to put into words his entire life. He wrote about Alpha's eyes, the eyes that once looked past suspicion and feared to find him. Out of 1,000 possibilities, not everything that is frightening is dangerous. He wrote, sometimes, it is fear itself that keeps us from hearing the true voice of the world around us. He remembered the night of the storm, the scent of blood carried on the cold wind, the moment human hands touched trembling fur, and the fragile life reflected in the mother wolf's eyes. Daniel understood, it was not science, nor bravery, that had saved them. It was trust, something simple, yet stronger than any survival instinct. And on the final page of an old notebook, he wrote a single sentence, as if leaving it for himself, or for anyone who might stumble across it one day. We do not need to understand the language of animals to feel their hearts. The story ended there. No grand declarations, no final conclusion, but for Daniel, and for anyone who had ever seen Alpha's silhouette standing beneath the forest sunset glow, it was a truth that needed no proof. Sometimes, a single look is enough to change a person's life, and a simple act, like following a limping wolf, can become the door to an entire world of love and compassion.